Hello, welcome to the fifth video in the series for the Battle of the Class competition. Hopefully, if you've made it this far, you know the drill. If you haven't watched videos 1 through 4, they're all linked in the description below. Make sure to watch those before you watch this one. As always, if you have any questions, you can contact me, Liana, or set up a time to chat. All that information also linked below. All right, Kelly, let them know all about pretotyping.
Okay, pretotyping. So what is pretotyping? This is a concept derived from the book, The Right It. And before this book was written, there was actually a lot of pretotyping resources online and forums online to talk about how do you test this idea to know you're building the right it before you build it right. So make sure you build it right before you build the right is the whole idea behind it. But because a lot of the failures that happen in a startup are just because you're building something nobody wants. You're not building the right it for your customer. And those customer interviews that we talked about are really helpful to understand the needs and priorities, but this is a tool that will actually allow you to pretend or fake the idea, to test it in the market, to see quickly, will a customer actually put something into this idea or give you some money or their time or energy or personal information like their email to show that they are actually interested in this. And a quick note, no matter what you're doing, when you're bringing an idea to market, there's something you're going to fail at. There's something that's going to go wrong. And this tool helps you to fail fast and learn and keep going without this being a total disaster, a total monetary and motivational disaster that makes you want to stop entirely. Small tests, essentially. Also, why do we do it? So I think customer interviews, they're helpful. They're very helpful, but sometimes they keep us in thought land because when you're talking to someone about the idea, there's several problems that can come up. So these thought land problems are, one, being lost in translation. So sometimes you describe the idea and someone that you're talking to doesn't really get it. They don't really understand what you're talking about, don't really understand the value just because maybe you've described it in the wrong way. Another problem is a prediction problem. So some people say they like something, but there's a problem. They have a problem actually predicting whether or not they would buy it. So I'm sure that people are familiar with this particular phenomenon when you've, put something in your cart and left it there for a while when you're online shopping. And even if you don't do that, you can probably understand like when you want something, but you're still not going to buy it. It seems cool, but you're not going to put your money into it. So another thought line problem is when you talk to people, they really don't put any skin in the game. So similar to the prediction, seems cool, but I'm not going to put my money into it. I'm not going to give you anything of mine just because it seems cool. So just by talking, you're giving no skin in the game. Also, when you talk to people, there is an opportunity for confirmation bias, and the questions, keeping them open-ended, not leading people to the answers that you want to hear. That's a helpful first start to like actually not try to eliminate that confirmation bias, but it's still difficult to not hear what you want to hear when you've been working an idea for a really long time and you basically want to hear what you want to hear. So pretotyping helps alleviate those problems because you're actually testing the idea with customers and getting feedback. Okay, so how does it work? Basically, you identify those core features that are important to your customer, decide what can be mocked up and simplified, and then use those mock-ups or fake products to collect and analyze the data. And I'll give you some examples of what that can look like, and then we'll go through an example as well. So hopefully this will be a little bit more solidified. Okay, so some options for pretotyping. The first one's a mechanical Turk. So a mechanical Turk is used when you're using human power to simulate technology that would take a lot of time or a lot of money to build. So a good example of that is IBM's speech-to-text technology. So IBM knew they could build, or had a good idea that they could build the speech-to-text technology, which is commonplace now, but at the time it was new. But they wanted to understand, like, does anybody even care? Would anybody want this? If we built this, would anyone think it was cool? So they could have built it and tested it and, seen on the market if it did well with whatever product they put it in. But instead, what they did was test it first. So they put a customer that they thought would be interested down in front of a computer, put a microphone in front of them, and basically told them to talk. And their words appeared on the screen as if speech-to-text technology was working. But what was really happening was the microphone was actually attached to a speaker in another room, and the computer had a keyboard in that other room that was attached to it. So somebody physically was in that other room listening to what they were saying, typing on the keyboard, and it was just appearing on the computer as if the technology was working. But it wasn't. It was just a human that was actually simulating that technology so that they didn't have to build it first if nobody thought it was cool or nobody thought it provided any value. Another example of this would be pretty much any algorithm. So an example here is Presence Magic Wand, but it's a lot of things when you're just trying to basically provide some output for customers. In this case, this present magic wand, you would send in your friend's social media profiles, and it would provide this output of gifts to give to your friend. And you could create some sort of algorithm that would do that automatically so that you could scale quickly and you don't need to worry about you physically doing that at first. But just to see if anybody's interested, you could present this idea and actually have them send you their social media profiles. You pick out the gifts, you send an email as if this technology is working on the back end, but it's really just you. So this is the test. Another example would be a Pinocchio. So this is when you use an inanimate artifact that acts as the proxy for the real thing. So when your design requires some sort of behavioral adaptation, or you expect the demand to be sensitive to the appearance or the form of the product, this is a really good one to do. So 2 examples are the IDEO surgical dissector and the Palm Pilot. The Palm Pilot was actually one of the original concepts of a prototype, and the person who created the Palm Pilot originally actually had, before the Palm Pilot, a failed version of the Palm Pilot. So for people that are unfamiliar with the Palm Pilot, it's essentially a BlackBerry that doesn't have like phone capabilities. It's just an agenda that you could like use that would fit into your pocket. You pull it out and put like your calendar in there. But before they had the Palm Pilot, there's actually a larger version of it that was more like an iPad size. So this bigger electronic agenda, and it was a big market failure. So the person who created it was on the lead on the team creating it. He said, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to make sure whatever form we create this in next is actually something people will use. So he cut out a piece of wood and a block and actually pretended as if that was his little Palm Pilot. So he'd pull it out in meetings and like tap on it to say to make it seem like he was creating an agenda on his Palm Pilot, which is just this piece of wood, just to see if he could develop the habit of actually pulling it out and using it. And I will say a quick caveat, usually you shouldn't just use yourself as the person that's actually testing this, but it's an interesting concept too that he pulled this like piece of wood out in public and actually tried to like use it as if it was a working agenda, which it was not. But the Palm Pilot ultimately did end up being successful for a time. And then obviously iPhone, BlackBerries came around and kind of wiped it out, but it was successful. So another example of this would be the IDEO surgical dissector. And IDEO is a design firm on the West Coast, well, actually more national now, but they created this surgical dissector for surgeons to use as a better tool in surgery. And instead of just building this like very expensive tool, what they first did was design the form. So as you can see, this is an expo marker, a film canister, and a clothespin. And essentially they just wanted to be the form of what they ultimately wanted this final product to look like, to make sure when they put it in the hands of surgeons, is this something that works for you? Is this something that makes sense? When you put in your hand, does it feel good for you to actually perform any sort of surgical procedure? So it ultimately ended up being this, but you can imagine that costs a lot of money to actually build, and you don't want to build it unless you know for sure by creating this or something similar to this, and there's probably very many different iterations of this that build and build and build until you get closer to this final product. But by doing that early, you avoid the mistake of building this out and having a big failure because it's not something that would actually work in its form for surgeons. Okay, another option, the fake door. So this is one that a lot of startups can use. So this is essentially marketing for an undeveloped idea. So it advertises your product or feature and tracks to see who's interested. So if you can describe this idea concisely in an ad or in some sort of marketing to potential customers, this is a really great option. One other thing, you should be pretty confident you can manage the expectations. So you shouldn't tell someone you can actually build a product and tell them to sign up on your website and place an order if you have no ability to get them that order in the next, 2 years. And if it is the next anything more than a few weeks or what is normal shipping time, that should be explicitly stated on this fake door marketing. But if you think you can manage expectations and you think you can just see if customers are interested by running an ad, this is awesome. This is a great option. A good example of this would be seminars. So say you wanted to create a seminar, a weekend seminar, and you could go through the process of creating the curriculum and getting some speakers and finding a location. But you could also just see if people sign up and see if people give you the money for this concept you have for a seminar before you actually put in any of that work, if you're reasonably certain you could put in that work and it would be something that you'd want to provide as the seminar. Another example would be Dropbox. So Dropbox actually, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with how they started, but Dropbox created a video that actually showed how the technology worked. before Dropbox, it's pretty much if you wanted to move files from one computer to another, you had to use a USB drive. So if you wanted to work at home from your work computer, you'd have to pull those files off of your work computer, put them on the USB drive, and then take that home. So Dropbox was just showing you how basically Dropbox works. You can like remotely access documents from different places. And this video showed that, and he posted it on websites that he thought would have customers that were interested in what he was doing. And from that was able to see, were people interested, people watch this? And also, did people sign up for, to learn more about the service, or to learn more about Dropbox, and to potentially be beta testers as well, which we'll talk about in a second. Okay, another option is the provincial. This is when you could provide a complete service experience without the infrastructure for a permanent experience. So basically you're doing whatever you want to do in a very narrow time and space frame. So an example would be Best Buy. Best Buy actually wanted to create this buyback program for old tech, people's old tech. But instead of actually putting it in every single store, allowing this to be an option for everyone across the country, they tested with a store in one specific place that they thought to be representative of the rest of the country. And they saw, would this work? So they put flyers up in people's cars, they put flyers up in their windows, they did a little bit of direct mailing, so a pretty cheap, marketing for this program, and just saw would people come out. They did a pop-up in the parking lot and had people bring their own tech. And they tracked when the people brought their technology and they gave them this gift card, they tracked where that gift card went, how much they spent, did they spend it at all? And they also were keeping track of like how much they could make off of potentially refurbished technology. So from doing that, they found that not only could they make money on the refurbished tech that the customers brought in, but they could also see that people got a gift certificate were usually spending more than that gift certificate. So they're usually making money off of it. So if they got a $100 gift certificate, they were buying a $400 TV, which ended up being profitable for them and being able to be giving them the information they need to say, this is going to be a profitable thing for the whole company, and rolling it out to the rest of the country. Another example would be Rent the Runway. So for anybody unfamiliar with Rent the Runway, it's a company that rents designer gowns to women. It started out as designer gowns to women, and it's also expanded now to a lot of different clothes, and I think they also have a men's line as well now. But essentially, they didn't want to buy all this inventory to sell dresses to everybody who might be interested in this, which is a lot of money if it's designer dresses. So what they did was they bought a few themselves, and they put this little pop-up on a college campus, or they thought were the people that were going to care the most or be interested the most in this idea. College students are constantly going to parties and seeing if they would be interested in renting, and also if they'd just be accustomed to the idea of renting clothes. Would that be okay with them? So they had this pop up, and they saw, like people were actually interested in renting these dresses. It was something that was nice for them to have, a nice dress at a lower price. And with Uber and Lyft being this new shared economy, getting used to that, there was less awkwardness with renting someone else's clothes. Okay, another option is impersonator. And this is essentially when you use an existing product or service to pose as the new offer and then test to see if people want it. So you're applying like a new skin or branding to a substitute like frame of an idea. So an example would be Tesla and Lotus Elise. So when Tesla started, although I'm sure Elon Musk could have just built Teslas, instead of just building this luxury electric car, he wanted to see, do people even want this? So he used a Lotus Elise and basically just replaced the exterior part of the Lotus Elise, but used it as like the building blocks or frame for showing people what this car would eventually, what the Tesla would eventually be. And he brought that to a place where he thought his customers would be, which was essentially like a fundraiser in the Silicon Valley area with people who were a little bit wealthier. He thought was the target customer, and thought, would people be interested in this? And not only would they be interested, but would they be willing to put down money? And people in that event did end up putting like 10 grand down toward being on the waiting list for this Tesla. So a really great option for seeing if there's any traction for this idea. Also, another example is just like this little kitschy one is, if you want to create dog mineral water, how could you test that? Instead of just use regular water and put a label of dog mineral water on it. Other quick ones. So a teaser can be a portion of a book. It's like a portion of a book or a little smaller part of whatever you're trying to do. Pretend to own is a lease until you buy. So if you have some sort of expensive equipment or machinery or something like that you would ultimately like to buy for your business, you can lease it until you buy to see if there's any interest from your customer. So a good example of this would be, if you had an interest in creating this eco-friendly car rental service, instead of buying a whole fleet of eco-friendly cars, you could rent those at first and then rent them out to a customer at a premium to see would anybody even be interested in this. Okay, some caveats. Again, pretotyping. So what is pretotyping? This is a concept derived from the book The Right It. And before this book was written, there was actually a lot of pretotyping resources online and forums online to talk about how do you test this idea to know you're building the right it before you build it right. So make sure you build it right before you build the right is the whole idea behind it. But because a lot of the failures that happen in a startup are just because you're building something nobody wants. You're not building the right it for your customer. And those customer interviews that we talked about are really helpful to understand the needs and priorities, but this is a tool that will actually allow you to pretend or fake the idea, to test it in the market, to see quickly, will a customer actually put something into this idea or give you some money or their time or energy or personal information like their email to show that they are actually interested in this. And a quick note, no matter what you're doing, when you're bringing an idea to market, there's something you're going to fail at. There's something that's going to go wrong. And this tool helps you to fail fast and learn and keep going without this being a total disaster, a total monetary and motivational disaster that makes you want to stop entirely. Small tests, essentially. Also, why do we do it? So I think customer interviews, they're helpful. They're very helpful, but sometimes they keep us in thought land because when you're talking to someone about the idea, there's several problems that can come up.
Have you had enough about pretotyping? Don't worry, there's a part 2. In the meantime, please go to bit.ly/BOTC_quiz5 to take the quiz associated with this video.